Power has become one of the defining constraints of the next decade. While AI and data centers are dominating the headlines, the reality is much bigger than that. Manufacturers, logistics providers, telecom operators, and utilities are all facing the same challenge: securing affordable, reliable power in a world where demand is growing faster than infrastructure can keep up. We're seeing organizations rethink everything from energy procurement to efficiency strategies increasingly, and many are exploring behind the meter generation and storage projects to gain more control over their energy future. To help me understand this and what's happening on the ground and where the market is headed, I'm joined by Saleh, who's the co-founder and CEO of Gravity. Welcome, Saleh, to Where Code Meets Capital.
Thanks for having me, Rob. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and I really appreciate you coming on board because I think, again, this is much bigger than AI data centers and everything that's going on. In a recent conversation we were having, it was really clear to me of where Gravity is focusing. But Gravity started with a strong carbon and disclosure story, but the core value seems to be around energy economics. When you sit with customers today, what's really their buying center? Compliance pressure, energy costs, or risk management? And how do you see that shifting over the next 12 months?
Yeah, Rob, I love the question. And you're right. We started off as a player that was pretty disappointed with the groundswell of providers that were supporting folks when it came to carbon management and disclosure. We knew that political and economic oscillations were the norm, and so eventually, if we didn't align ourselves with what we found to be evergreen priorities, right, cost-cutting measures, time-saving measures like energy efficiency projects, we'd see headwinds when there were a little bit of difficulties on the disclosure market. So we never bet a house on, regulatory disclosure or anything. We support across the stack: carbon management and energy projects. We do corporate disclosure, supply chain engagement to the extent it's necessary. And recently we launched a utility bill management product that handles the life cycle of utilities as well, especially when the code and ontology of utilities across the nation is so complex. Whatever we can do to bend the curve down, make sure people are paying the right rates, was something we wanted to invest in.
Yeah, I mean, again, you've talked about that utility bill management as a decades-old, under-innovated space. Concretely, what kinds of errors, rate structures, or surcharges are you uncovering in those bills, and how often do you see material savings that actually move the needle for industrial or data center operators?
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, the utility bill management industry has been centric not only to the detection of these errors, but even just getting a grasp of the consumption and spend that you have across your different on-grid and off-grid utilities. So we wanted to make sure we had those table stakes, and we've developed a mechanism for pulling in that data, both through integration with utilities across the globe, but also through being able to take the unstructured PDFs that you get from any sort of supplier and dropping them into the system and having us deterministically export the most relevant and salient parts of that data. It also includes bill compensation, so you can actually take accounts payable and outsource it, which some people do to avoid late fees. But when it comes to the other things we detect, it's really a pretty broad spectrum. There are a few things that are very rooted in just the operational efficiency of your facility. Maybe there's a power factor issue on your bill that means that the harmonics between you and your node connection to the grid are actually a little off, and we might have to show up and deploy a capacitor. But then there's this long, complex list of confusing things that rooted in riders and surcharges, like maybe there's a benefit charge that every commercial industrial consumer is charged, but you can actually fund energy efficiency projects locally and file for an exemption if you prove that you're actually doing behind the meter energy efficiency projects. Or maybe you're paying for a 24/7 rate code in a certain jurisdiction when you qualify for a time of use rate code that's 1.8 cents cheaper per kilowatt hour. And so it's quite a broad spectrum of things that we can detect, and we don't like to leave those detections collecting dust on a shelf. We'll actually chase down the value that's behind those, whether through energy efficiency projects or through filing the right forms to actually get you that lowered rate or that exemption.
Yeah, I think that's totally key to a lot of organizations. And I mean, the complexity of this and how regulated and how many different things and knobs there are to turn in there, and just trying to understand these bills, having been in the data center business myself, I can tell you it is not easy, to put it mildly. And with AI build outs and power hungry data centers really pushing the grid to the edge from Virginia to California, what are you seeing on the ground? Are customers in data centers and telecom treating power as a strategic constraint yet, or are they still reactive? We'll find the megawatts mindset, or are they going to projects like you were talking about, behind the meter type stuff?
Yeah, I think we're past the we're hoping for megawatts of capacity moment, right? Year over year increases across the nation. We're in the double digit percentages, and in some geos, it was actually 20% plus, and really terrifying. Things like Pennsylvania, where organizations that might have 25 to 40% of their spend from an OPEX perspective go towards energy, are now seeing one of the biggest line items increase by such a significant amount, and they were already playing with razor thin margins. So I would say they're very much in how do we handle this mode. So they're actively looking for what they can do, but the tools at their disposal are fairly dull. And anything that can actually save them even fractions of a percent is something that they're champing at the bit for.
Yeah, I think that, to me, that is one of the keys is, again, you got to be moving past that. One of the other things that you brought up in our conversations previously, framing compliance and disclosure as kind of a chore that consumes entire roles and really doesn't change outcomes for those organizations. Walk us through a real example where Gravity took those mandatory disclosure data and turned it into concrete projects. What did you deploy, and who owned it internally, and kind of what did they see from a payback perspective?
Yeah, two thoughts come to mind, because you called out the chore. I want to highlight organizations that used to spend literally 10,000 plus hours manually scraping data so that they could put it into what was perceived to be modern platforms or a consultant partner. McCarthy is a perfect example of that. They're a large construction organization here in the US, and they had spent truly months across several different organizations within their company, tracking down utility bills, fuel invoices, the assets that receive combustive fuels off-grid, and really trying to understand how to actually translate that into scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. Gravity was inspired by the frustration we heard from everybody that we spoke to in this world. They had told us they'd been promised a story of automation, but we're still populating opinionated templates from these vendors or having to actually review the bills manually themselves. And so for them, we made it really easy with just drag and drop 1,000 bills, 10,000 bills, in this case 50,000 bills, and within minutes we'll actually peruse those and deterministically pull out everything that's relevant, not only for the disclosure side, but we pull out cost information and everything that might be relevant for the action side, insights that actually are rooted in what can we do to make the spend next year a little bit less per output, right? We expect these companies to grow, so we don't tell them to consume less energy in aggregate, but we tell them for each unit of output that you're trying to produce, how do we make that slightly more efficient so that you can save money on your margin. Other examples beyond the time-saving side is we work with a lot of manufacturers, plenty of them in the automotive sector. I'm going to anonymize one that we worked with that contracted us to be able to meet a disclosure need for one of their OEM customers. And during the process of collecting their data, we found projects that span from waste heat recovery to demand response programs directly with the utility providers to sales tax exemptions at some of their facilities that translated into a 25x return on their investment with us. So they were able to, within 6 months, actually save over $1 million in aggregate just from the kind of very low-hanging fruit projects that we were able to deploy from them. That's before we even get to the ones that people think of as like the true behind-the-meter projects of energy generation or energy storage, but those are nuts down the gambit because they've now built a lot of confidence that there's money left on the table for them to collect. And so we're really excited about kind of those linchpin use cases where they might have thought they've done the easy things, but there's so much still for them to be able to recoup.
So let's kind of zoom out a little bit, and look across manufacturing, warehousing, telco and data center customers that you have. What trends do you really think will define the next phase of power and energy management, whether it be behind the meter type assets? And I know some of your customers in the data center space are really big into that, and new contracting models with utilities or companies effectively becoming their own mini utilities.
It usually starts with the deeper pocketed energy constrained looking for whatever kilowatt they can find where they generate energy behind the meter. But we're starting to see this proliferate organizations where the economics have become no brainers for them to actually think about it themselves. So we have organizations that 5 years ago probably scoffed at the idea of building a solar array near their facility that now have done it at several organizations and several facilities across their portfolio because they know that on a 3 to 5 year time horizon, the payback is going to be more than worth it. And they are actively in a sort of crisis mode as they think about how they maintain the double bottom line that they've been managing for the past decades. And so we definitely have the hyperscalers and the data center providers. Crusoe is a client of ours who has also been at the forefront of figuring out where to source energy. They used to locate themselves near flaring sites so that they could actually capture that wasted energy and leverage it for their own data centers. But now that's increasingly something that organizations across different sectors are actively prioritizing.
I think it's enlightening to people to help them understand that everything's like a factory. Data factories, manufacturing obviously is real factories, and that power security and energy security is just so key to them. So last comment, anything you want to tell people about Gravity or what you got going on?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of what I talked about was fairly matter of fact. Making it seem like maybe it's extremely easy, but the reality is there's a lot of connective tissue that goes into making any of this work, and that's a lot of what we identified early on. It's identifying the issue in the first place, deciding what a potential solution could be, running an RFP to find the vendor, finding the financing, actually compounding it with a couple different other projects, right? Like maybe demand response is more lucrative if you find battery energy storage or vice versa. Maybe you can actually fund your battery energy storage project by figuring out the demand response program to opt into. And so it's worth highlighting that connective tissue is very much what Gravity is meant to be. And it's the problem that we were trying to solve in the market. You don't have to have a 20-person organization that's focused on energy efficiency to be able to access these things. There are tools that actually help you consolidate that stack of complexity into something a lot more palpable. They actually often get buying power that you don't get to get at a mid-market or lower enterprise organization, or even an enterprise organization that might not have the ability to sway prices in your favor. But by aggregating our customer demand, by satisfying this kind of cross-cutting need that goes from inception all the way to the actual execution and recuperation of some kilowatts, is something that we're really passionate to continue to invest in. So Rob, thank you so much for having me. And if anybody needs help, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Absolutely. And we'll put your web address and everything in the notes here. So I really appreciate you, Saleh, for coming on board today. It was eye-opening to me, and I thought I knew a lot about this stuff, but I don't know anything compared to what you guys see on a day-to-day basis. So thanks for coming and uncovering this for folks. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Rob.